So can you tell me a little bit about your book and what the genesis was for it?
Do you want me to introduce myself?
You don't need to.
Okay, great. The book is called The Love Response, published by Ballantine, which is a section of Random House in 2009. And it's basically teaching individuals how to access the physiology of love to shift out of the physiology of stress.
Can you give me an example?
Absolutely. So most people experience a negative emotion like fear or anger or any such in any kind of stressful experience. And with that negative emotion comes an automatic thought and usually automatic behaviors and a physiology. That physiology is usually a negative one, which will then elicit some type of action or behavior to take care of the problem. So for instance, you might be in a situation where you're fearful that there isn't enough food. Well, then the physiology or stress response will get activated to initiate the action that will then go get the food to solve the problem, and now the system goes back in what we call homeostasis or balance or equilibrium, what have you. So there's a negative emotion, and there's a negative response or physiological response that initiates an action that will solve a problem. When that problem is solved, the system comes back into balance. When the brain perceives that that problem is not solvable, that it's a stress that's not manageable, that stress response or those physiological changes don't stop. So in other words, you get into a place where you're in a continuous negative emotional state, a continual muscle tension state. So that's a stress state. And so I've discovered that the meditative state, which you can access by accessing the physiology of love, is the opposite of that response, the opposite of the stress response. And you can access that easily.
And can you talk a little bit about that process of accessing this?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of ways to access the physiology of love. One is by remembering a situation of awe, like thinking about watching your child walk for the first time, or gazing into the eyes of somebody you absolutely adore, or even just thinking about the most incredible sunset you've ever seen. It's sort of acts of gazing at a miracle. That will turn on a physiology. It stimulates dopaminergic reward systems in your brain, releases dopamine, releases the love hormone called oxytocin, which reduces stress response reactivity, reduces anxiety and aggression, decreases adrenaline and cortisol levels, and stimulates those positive neurons in the brain that makes you believe that anything is possible. So you can do that through what I use a lot of is visualization, and I call them positive verbal commands, and what those are affirmations that are associated with a very positive and loving, love-filled experience. Like, imagining that you are sort of relaxing in a pool of clear blue water and saying, I feel loved, and saying that repeatedly so that later on in your day you can say, I feel loved, and it will bring back the experience of lying in that gorgeous pool of clear blue water.
And the link is between the action that you're taking intentionally and the physiological response that it's eliciting.
That's right. That's right. So there's always, I like to tell people, you always have a choice. Stress is going to happen. Whether you want it to or not, bad things happen. And the key is not to take it personally, because the minute we start taking things personally, it's as if your brain is saying, well, the survival of my species is being impeded. And then that's going to cause the stress response to be hyperactivated. And that's like trying to stop a shiver when it's cold outside. So unless you reset the thermostat, the shiver is going to happen. So when you're aware of how something feels, which is a lot of what this book is about, a lot of what this teaching is about, is becoming aware of the physiology of stress. How does that feel, and does that feel good to me? Do I like feeling this way? Do I like feeling angry? Do I like feeling overwhelmed? Because you don't have to feel that way. The situation is bad, but you don't have to react to it in the same way. How can you be the Zen master of your life and bring that meditative state into motion so that you can handle it better? So you can intentionally choose a different response by deactivating that stress response, which will allow you to move from that primitive fear-based brain to the higher intellectualizing, spiritual, connected, positive thinking, resilient brain, and to look at something as manageable versus unmanageable and then actually handle it better.
Very cool. That's great. So your background is as a physician,
yes.
If I understand. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you went from that to this work?
Well, how much time do you have? Well, I'm an internist. I'm board certified in internal medicine. I actually worked in internal medicine as a primary care doctor for 5 years. My journey really began, and I write about this in the book, in my residency at Boston City Hospital when I had the unfortunate or fortunate experience of being stuck with an HIV needle. And in those days, there wasn't much you could do, but they did experiment with me and put me on the post-exposure prophylactic cocktail, which at that time was 14 pills a day for 6 weeks, which made me very ill. And I was 28 at the time. I'd never really been sick before, and you can imagine my story of suffering came out of all the things that I had done wrong, and this is why this was happening, or what can I do right to make it better. And so that experience made me start really thinking about my life and about doing things differently. So even though things turned out okay after that, there was a succession of events that brought me to my knees, like Dad having a heart attack, apartment burning down, and all happening within a 4 or 5 month period. No big deal. However, I became profoundly depressed, and I really didn't want to live. But through that, what got me through that was love. It was love that I received from other people. Eventually a love where I could connect with something bigger than me and find purpose. And eventually discovering that I was indeed a lovable, miraculous human being, in that self-love, which I call the love pyramid. And that together led me to the Mind Body Institute, where I volunteered initially after I was done with my residency. And then they asked me to be the medical director. And then I started learning about the clinical application of stress physiology. And by then, I was ready to leave my job as a primary care doctor. So in 2002, I left, and I worked as a medical director, but started studying Eastern philosophy, Chinese medicine, anything I could get my hands on, and started bringing the two together and saying, wow, there's a fusion here between East and West through stress physiology and love. There's a common theme here. And so then I started developing my own practice of providing medicine, which is really coaching in the end. And that's really what doctors did. It wasn't until probably 150 years ago that the job of a doctor became so focused. It was really helping people with their lives, which is what I do now. And so that's sort of, the transition has been one of many years, but it's still evolving. We'll see what I'm doing next year.
And what does your actual practice look like now?
Well, people come to me with all kinds of problems. They are always stress-related, so it could be a stress-related physical issue, or just I have cancer, fibromyalgia. People come to me because they're having relationship issues. They're trying to find a relationship. They're having career issues. And of course, it's usually manifesting in a physical way, that they can't sleep, or they're feeling irritable. Their wife is saying, I don't want to deal with you anymore, I'm leaving you. So there's usually some type of crisis that leads them to me, and usually somebody they know has seen me, and they say, I've had great success, why don't you go see Dr. Selhub? So really it's anyone that is willing to do some work and wants to learn some self-healing tools. And so they come in, I explain physiology, so they right away have the information they need to understand that they're not crazy. And there's a reason they feel this way. And then I start giving them tools right away to start learning how to shift those feelings and shift that physiology. And we do all different kinds of techniques that I've picked up along the way, including meditation and learning the concept of energy and how to do energy work for oneself.
Great. You mentioned one of my favorite themes earlier on. I'll go back to it. The idea that teaching people not to take something personally when it pushes a button is just crucially important.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Absolutely. I mean, when you understand stress physiology, if you break it down to the most primitive of levels, it's about survival of the species. So the fight or flight response is when the species is in jeopardy. It's appropriate. Now, back when we evolved, it was really appropriate because we really didn't have much. Our life really was in jeopardy. We didn't live very long. And usually, as I believe it, understand it, evolution usually takes millions of years. And the human being has evolved very quickly, and the brain actually hasn't caught up. And so the brain doesn't necessarily distinguish between physical, psychological, and emotional stress at all times. And when it does that, it drops into the survival of my species is in jeopardy. And that translates to the validation of my identity is being threatened. And so when one takes something personally, it necessarily means that the validation of my identity, survival of my species, what have you, I know that's a leap, but and I'm talking on a very sort of primitive physiological basis, is basically why the response is reacting that way, because the validation of my existence is being threatened. If I know the validation of my existence is positive and present, then you can do whatever you want, sticks and stones. So I give the explanation of if I scratch you on the leg, trying to get your attention, you'll just find me annoying, but you'll know that I'm just not paying attention. You have the right sense of mind to know, well, this is no big deal on my part, but hey, Eva, pay attention. But if I scratch you, trying to get your attention, you've got a big ulcer, your reaction is going to be entirely different. You're going to call me insensitive. You say all doctors are insensitive. The all or nothing statement will be there. Nobody ever pays attention to me. Why is it that I'm always getting hurt? Can't you see that I've got a big thing? How dare you? The overreaction, even though my behavior was no different. So it's taking an action personally because there's an underlying wound. There's an underlying belief that says, I'm not being validated, I'm not being respected, I'm not being loved. Again, this is a big leap, a generalization, but it's sort of on a primitive level how I see it. And that's sort of how I approach, by making that individual subconsciously, consciously, unconsciously, energetically, whatever term you want to use, feel loved, feel okay, feel validated in whatever technique that you use. Then it actually can turn off that response and get you from that lower brain to the higher brain, to that place of I'm valid and I'm okay.
It's very clear. I really appreciate it. Most of the people here are coaches. I don't know if I should say most, but many of the coaches here have no medical background or medical training. How can they use your methods in their coaching practices most effectively?
I think that's a great question, because this is why I teach. And this is information that everybody can know. I teach what I don't even know if this term exists, but I call it an empathic teaching style. You know, the brain doesn't hold on to a lot of words, but it will remember experiences. So I teach physiology through a vehicle of experience. It's even in the book. So I talk about being chased by a lion and how would that feel to you? Would you reproduce? Would you forage for food? Would, you know, your muscles be weak? So people actually experience the feeling of the physiology within them. And then I give them the physiology of, or the experience of love and the experience of awe, and they feel the difference. So it's through the feeling, through mindfulness, if you will, of your feeling, that you can then understand very clearly something that's scientific or medical. And you don't need to be a medical practitioner to be able to explain this to somebody else. You just have to understand what it feels like.
Well, and as you say, the best way to teach it to somebody is to teach it experientially, and then they can feel it and pass it on to the others.
It's the best way.
Other than through your book, how could coaches learn more about your system?
They can contact me. I love getting emails. I work with people individually all over the world. I just got a client in Australia, and I have one in Singapore, so that's always nice. I actually love working with coaches. I love coaches. The reason I love coaches is because they're not stuck. You know, you have somebody who's really been taught one method, and you have to work within that method, whereas coaches are really nice and open to learning, and it's so much fun. So I love coaching coaches. And it takes a few sessions and they've got it, they run with it, and that's even more fun. So I work with people individually, I work with people on Skype, and I have a practice where people can come and work with me if they want to and learn. And I also do workshops. I do workshops all over the world. So I'm usually on my newsletter or my website, either theloveresponse.com or drselhub.com. And you can keep up with that and come to a workshop.
Cool. Anything in particular striking you that you've learned about coaches or coaching but being here this time?
What I really love is, like I said, the openness, the positivity. You know, I think that the main theme here is resilience and positivity, and that everyone is here because of some type of personal journey or life journey, which has allowed them to then be there and be helpful for others. And I love that. I love that there's so many walks of life from so many different backgrounds that all carry the same language, because as we know, the people in the world all speak different languages. So we can't be the one person that delivers the message. And for me, it's very exciting to see people from all different walks of life that can carry the same message. And that to me is very exciting.
Very cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.